So with that out of the way, we're gonna move to our weekend picks for this weekend. NFL Wild Card, Super Wild Card Weekend, they call it now. 6 games, starting with the Browns and the Houston Texans. These teams actually just played. We were talking about this just before. 36-22, Browns got that win. I wouldn't say it's going to happen like that again. In this one, we are both picking the Browns. Texans, they proved me wrong in that game against the Colts. I picked the Colts. Texans came out with the dub at the end. With that being said, though, I think the Browns will still beat them again. Probably going to be a closer game, though. I think Texans, for me in this one, I think Texans offense will be good, but I think the Browns defense is going to be able to come out and make some plays at the end of it. I'd say, it'll probably be like 24-20 or something like that. Browns defense get a big stop at the end on the last drive. Joe Flacco, maybe he'll have another 300-yard game. I wouldn't, guarantee it, but I'd say they're going to need him to have a good game because you can't just come in and expect, even though it's a young team in Houston, you can't expect, Joe to come out and throw for 100 and expect the defense to win. Like, nah, the defense is going to play well, but I think Joe Flacco is also going to have to go throw 250 at least.
Yeah, I mean, the Texans are a good football team, and we're both picking the Browns on this one, but that's nothing really against the Texans. I just think the Browns have a little bit of an edge on defense, but even with that defensive edge, you're going to need Joe Flacco to really show up here and take over this team the way he has in games, against the Jets, against the Texans, against the Bears or Jaguars. I mean, he has been on a pretty good tear. I think they need that to stay alive if they want to, come out with any sort of victory. I mean, the Texans have a good offense. You can only hold them off so many times without answering before they end up overwhelming you. So I think this will be a good one. It's kind of unfortunate that's going to be like the earliest game. I mean, because I think this is the potential to be one of the better games. These two teams are very evenly matched. Cleveland, of course, has a slightly better record, just one win, but was not the divisional champion. The Texans took over the AFC South at the end, give this a 4-5 matchup in Houston. But I do think that despite the home field advantage, Joe Flacco and the Browns are going to come in and spoil the day for the Texans. Going from there, we'll have our first split, and we actually split a few times on these playoffs. It's the joy of football. This would be fun. We have the 6th seed Dolphins, who are the 2 seed for every week except the last, and the 3 seed Kansas City Chiefs. I almost said Carolina Chiefs. That was not the Carolina team. They're going to be playing in Arrowhead. That is a big thing. We are splitting. I'm taking the Dolphins. Terrence will be taking the Chiefs. For me personally, I think this game is actually just going to be like pure stupid football. If you want me to be honest, it's going to be like negative 26 degrees. It's going to be super, super, super cold. Conditions are just not going to be great for a passing game. In that regard, I do think that a fully healthy Dolphins team has a better run game to work with, and their defense, especially fully healthy, has had some slightly better highs than the Chiefs defense. Chiefs defense has been one of their bigger parts of this game, but Xavier Howard is out, so they're not going to be fully healthy. We are going to still be relying on Eli Apple. Devon Holland may not be in either. Mostert and Waddle also still questionable, probably going to be playing. But the thing about this game, I think for me, is that it's just going to be a really tomfoolery-filled game. Tua has been known to throw some pretty bad interceptions, even when it's not cold. I think he's been a little worse when it has been cold. And the Chiefs receivers could not catch anything at all. So I think it's going to be a battle of tomfoolery. I do think that the Chiefs have somewhat of an edge due to being in Arrowhead. I think they're going to be a little more comfortable. But I think at the end of the day, this is going to be a game full of mistakes. And I think the Chiefs being slightly worse on defense and probably slightly worse, definitely slightly worse on offense, I think they can't afford the mistakes as much. If it's a close game, like it was like that Dolphins-Bills game, I do think the Dolphins might be cooked. They do not perform well in that scenario, but if they can get out and try to stay more than one touchdown ahead, I think they'd be all right. Or because of the weather, it may be just a super low-scoring affair. And again, I think that if you rely on the Dolphins' run game, you've got a much easier path to a Dolphins win than the Chiefs would with just Isaiah Pacheco. I think Achane, Jeff Wilson, and Mostert give you a much more dynamic way to take over a really cold and hard-to-pass game like this.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about this before the video. I was going to go with the Dolphins. Even with the loss on Sunday night against the Bills, like I was like, Chiefs. this is a perfect opportunity for the Dolphins to catch the Chiefs. The Chiefs, obviously, this is not the best team that they've had in a while. We talked early in the season about the offense not being there, but the defense being there. But overall, this team isn't as good as it has been, you know, even coming off of a Super Bowl. With that being said, when I marinated on it for a little bit more, I was just like, unless you get just Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert out there, you said Xavier Howard's not going to be out there. Like, you have to get them on the field. And because they need to get out there, take a lead early and not let up. Because otherwise, I feel like the Chiefs, like you said, they're going to have the advantage being at home in the Arrowhead. Now, I don't think, just because it's going to be insanely, extremely cold, that the Dolphins are automatically going to lose just because of that. I mean, they obviously play 8 or 9 games a year in Miami. So, they spend most of their time in warm weather, but it's not like their players have never played in cold before. Obviously, the Chiefs had the advantage there, but these guys have played football for most of their lives. They played in cold weather. But I would say in that sense, it does favor the Chiefs more. And I just trust the Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes, that's the main thing. Even in the year where Travis Kelsey is having, not as amazing of a year as he had, not getting 1,000, but he was sat down in that last game, so he probably would have gotten it anyway. Even in a year like that, where everything is going wrong for them, it seemed like after that start, I still think the Chiefs are going to be able to come out. I would say it's going to be really close. Like I would say this one goes like 20-17 Chiefs. Not going to be high scoring, obviously. I would just trust the Chiefs more in this situation. Patrick Mahomes is going to make plays somehow at the end and get a win. I just don't know if I pick the Chiefs beyond that. I wouldn't pick them, if they're going up against another team, like say the Ravens or somebody else, like I probably wouldn't pick them. But based on what I saw last week with the Dolphins, I'm not going to pick them in this one. I'm going with the Chiefs. Then we move to the last AFC game, Bills and the Steelers. This one we are both picking the Bills. We talked about in that video. They somehow turned the ball over 3 times in pivotal moments and came out with a dub against the Dolphins, winning the division. They've been incredibly impressive the last stretch of the season for the most part. They had to do pretty much exactly what they did to get into the playoffs. Not only get in, but get the number 2 seed. And even though you're going up against a Steelers team that, they've been really weird down the stretch. They beat the Ravens. Obviously, Ravens sat a lot of their guys, specifically Lamar. Odell was hurt anyway, but they've been a really weird team. So I think this one, how close it is, comes down to what Steeler team shows up. If we get the team that we saw the other day, even against the Ravens, wasn't all that impressive in a dub, or we get the team that we saw against the Bengals, I think it'll be closer. But I just don't see, especially with TJ Watt being out, like you're not going to have that defensive presence like you usually would. The Steelers have, like, I don't know what their record exactly is without TJ Watt since he's been there, but I want to say it's like a 1-10 or something. Like it's not good. He is absolutely the heart and soul of that defense. Even with Cam Hayward, some other guys back there, they're not going to be able to stop the Bills, in my opinion. And I don't think that offense is going to do what it did against the Bengals again. And in some of those games that they had since firing Matt Canada, don't think it's going to happen. I think the obvious choice here is Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers had a nice little resurgence. I was obviously pretty low on Mason Rudolph. He immediately proved me wrong through the next game. So I think that they're not a team to fully count out in this one, but the absence of TJ Watt is going to hurt a lot. I mean, you still have Cam Hayward on that defense, as you said, but also, as you said, I just don't think it's going to be enough to slow down the Bills' offense. TJ Watt is a major, major, major part of that Steelers team. I mean, half the times this season when they had a primetime game, when they put up 2 players for the two players from each team for the graphic, it was TJ Watt. You don't often see like one defender be the guy as the face of a team. So I just think without him having to go to Buffalo, play the mostly, I wouldn't say mostly healthy, but a Bills team who's overcome all their injuries and is playing like they're mostly healthy in Buffalo without TJ Watt, I think it's just going to be rough. The Bills are probably going to take this one. The Steelers could make it interesting, but ultimately I think there's big potential for the Bills to make this one ugly. It just kind of depends on how well Mason Rudolph and company are able to get going and if they can make it a fight or not. So, yeah. From there, we're going to remain in the 7 versus 2 category, but we are now going to pivot over to the NFC. We've been going through these in the order that these games will play. So at this point, we would have the AFC wrapped up. Not wrapped up, obviously, not the Super Bowl ready, but wrapped up as far as the wild card round. The first game we'll talk about here is the Green Bay Packers against the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys, who ended up taking the division at the end. Well, not really at the very end, but they came back throughout the season for chasing a gap, took it from the Eagles. And the Packers, who seemed to be dead at one point, but also made a little bit of a run. Terrence and I, however, are going to say that their run stops here. We're going to agree on this one and both take the Dallas Cowboys. This one, I think there's a lot of talent on that Packers team. I think Jordan Love really came to life. I think he's definitely been like the breakout guy of the year, even in kind of their losing streak. I mean, he had a few rough games. Notably, his roughest game was in a victory, or not roughest, but one of the rough games, just for like the thought of it, is against the Panthers, where he starts to kind of mess around, and it gets to be a scary situation where the Panthers could have forced overtime, but mismanaged the clock. Otherwise, I mean he's played well. He's got the Packers into the playoffs amidst the chaos of that division with the injuries to the Vikings and everything. But the Cowboys have been really, really good this season. They're 8-0 at home, and this game is in Dallas. Cowboys have a better offense than the Packers. They have a better defense than the Packers, but for sure. I think this game will probably, hopefully for Packers fans, send Joe Barry out of that organization. But I think the Cowboys' offense and defense is going to be too much to handle. They're going to be in Dallas. I don't think the Packers have much of a chance to stand up against the weight of this Cowboys team. Obviously, you have the fact that the Cowboys have not performed well in the playoffs recently, but I really don't see that being a continuing trend here. I think the Cowboys are going to take care of business in this first game.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an intriguing matchup. I'd say all the NFC ones, really kind of are. I felt like this for me was an easy choice, but I can absolutely see where people would say, hey, maybe Green Bay might come in and upset them. Like Packers, they're on a 3-game winning streak. Obviously competition in that winning streak, not the best, but they are playing their, for the most part, best football late in the season when it really mattered, when they need to get to the playoffs. And that includes Jordan Love, of course, who, when you actually look at his stats, it's like, wow, he had a better season than you really think. Now, obviously, you can, if you watch every game, like he might not, I'm not going to sit here and act like he was God. But if you just look at the stats, it's like 32 touchdowns, 11 picks, 4,000 yards, all things considered, like, because we really didn't know what to expect from him this season. And I'd say the exact same thing for Green Bay. I really had no idea what to expect. Like when we talked about the NFC North in the last video, even going back to the picks video at the beginning of the season, like we didn't think that the North, as overall, would be as good this year. The Vikings last year, they won so many of those one-score games. Ain't gonna happen again. Even besides the Kirk Cousins injury, the Lions end up taking that division, by a 3-game margin, 4-game margin, I should say. If you, 3-game margin. So it's been a weird season for Green Bay, and I do give them a chance in this one. I think the Cowboys are going to come out. They know people are going to be talking about them regardless. They're going to come out like I kind of said with the Dolphins. I think they need to come out, score early, score often. They understand the game plan now. Clearly, give the ball to CeeDee Lamb. We'll figure out the rest. Give the ball to Jake Ferguson every once in a while. Attempt to run the ball. You got to get Tony Pollard running the ball at least a little bit, but obviously attacking that Green Bay Packers defense is going to be your biggest option here and your biggest path to victory. And like you said, Joe Barry, if you talk to Packers fans right now, they obviously don't want to lose this game, especially to the Cowboys, given the history between these two teams, but they might be pleased with the result if it gets Joe Barry out of there. But I'd say, real Packers fans, they don't really care about that too much in the sense of this being a playoff game. But yeah, I would still go with the Cowboys. They've been the obvious better team this year, and I think that'll continue. They get that win, and they will move on to the divisional round with another home game. Now, moving on to a reunion. Detroit Lions and LA Rams. We were all talking about Matthew Stafford, obviously going back to Detroit, but it's still kind of a thing for Jared Goff as well. Team that he played for in a Super Bowl before Matthew Stafford did and won. So a lot of storylines going into this game, jersey things going on as well as some weird stuff. But both of us are actually going to split on this one. So I'm sticking with Detroit. He's going to pick the Rams again. I respect the pick. I think it's entirely possible for the Rams to win. I just think for me again, the one thing here, I think clearly Detroit's a better team. But I will say the Rams can and they probably should take advantage of that Detroit secondary. That's going to be a path to victory. Puka Nacua was just named to, I think, All Pro team number 2, second team All Pro. So congrats to him. That's going to be their best bet. They've had a resurgence late in the season. My thing is just this. We've seen how good Detroit has been all season. If they can protect Jared Goff as they should, just let him do what he's been doing for most of the season without the turnovers like we saw in that Dallas game. I think Detroit should be able to win, but this one I would say would probably be a little bit more higher scoring, one of the higher scoring games to me. Obviously Detroit, their stadium situation is probably a lot better than let's say Kansas City or Buffalo, where you're more likely not going to be dealing with you are going to be dealing with the elements. So yeah, I would go Detroit here, but I definitely see where you can go with the Rams.
Yeah, and my Rams pick here is definitely it's a reluctant one. I actually would say nothing against the Rams, but I would prefer that the Lions win this game. I just have a feeling. I'm going to go with the feeling. But I think it comes down to Detroit's secondary and the fact that I agree that this game is going to be probably the highest scoring game, at least in this first round of the playoffs. And I think that in a high scoring game, it's always going to come down to that final drive. And I think if you give Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua a final drive specifically against that Detroit secondary, that the Lions are in a bit of trouble. I mean, we could see high 30s. I would even expect both teams to get near 40 in this one. I think it's just going to be a high profile display of offense. And I do think the Lions have a super good chance to actually take a victory in this one. But I'm going to go with my gut feeling and say that Stafford is going to come back to Detroit and spoil it for his former fan base. Him and Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua. It's been a really, really good trio when all healthy. And I think that's going to be a hard thing for the Lions to contend with. I do think that the Lions are going to put up a massive fight, and I would not be shocked if the Lions win. I would not find it crazy for people to pick the Lions in this one. Despite their secondary issues, they still ended up being 12-5. They overcame a lot this season, and just due to the sheer power of their offense. So yeah, I believe this is going to be one of the highest scoring ones. I think it's going to amount to be a shootout affair, and I just trust Matthew Stafford a little bit more in a shootout at this current point. But again, no surprise if the Lions move on and keep the playoffs running somewhat through Detroit. Going from there, what I would say is a high scoring affair. I'd actually say we're going to get to what could be one of the lower scoring ones based on how these two teams have performed. And it is, again, it's our final game, and it's another split. It's actually going to be the Philadelphia Eagles against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Eagles being the lower seed here, even though they were 11-6. Divisional things happening there, which I think is still great. I have no problem with that. I'm going to be taking the 9-8 Buccaneers, who are 4-4 at home, to snuff out the Eagles on Wild Card Weekend. This one doesn't actually feel like a crazy pick, even though it might, when you think about the whole scope of the season, and even the last week for the Buccaneers being a 9-0 win over the Carolina Panthers, you would expect a little more out of that of a team that's going to beat the Eagles. The Eagles did lose the Giants and the Cardinals in the past 2 weeks. They beat the Giants as well, but before that, they lost the Seahawks, they lost the Cowboys. They're on a horrible, horrible streak. They're dealing with some injuries, and even though A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts actually now is clear, even though these guys are going to be playing, that can be at full health. And I do think that the Buccaneers have a really gritty defense and an offense that can withstand and hold up, at least in a low-scoring affair. So I would do think this is going to be a pretty low-scoring affair where the Buccaneers take a close victory over a kind of flailing Eagles team. And I think it's going to be, a little unfortunate to see the Eagles go down like that. But, a good story if the Buccaneers are able to pull that off. But I do think just the grittiness of the Bucs defense, the kind of inconsistency of the Eagles in these past 2 weeks. And sure, I think if you scale it back, the Eagles are a much better team. I'd hate to be blinded by recency bias, but it just seems like the Eagles can't get it together. And not that the Buccaneers are like glaringly better. I just think that the way they've been playing defense and the way that they're able to kind of withstand some close games, and even that, I mean, some of their recent victories have had some pretty high-scoring wins over the Jaguars, Packers, and Falcons. So, I mean, I think they have the potential, if that offense comes alive, to put on a pretty good show against an Eagles team it hasn't looked their best. So I'm going to take the Buccaneers. I don't think it will be high scoring like some of those wins. I could see like a 20-17, maybe lower, 17-14 kind of affair here, where the Buccaneers kind of take off a slugfest in the final night of Wild Card Weekend.
Yeah, this one absolutely could end up being like 1960 and some crap like that. Seating aside, it seems like the Eagles are still the favorite for this game, but I feel like the tide is shifting as in general public opinion. I think it feels like it's shifting more towards the Bucks, and based off that Giants game, I would even say before the Giants game, right? Eagles have a very good chance to lose against the Bucks. I'd say, this is probably the biggest chance for an upset all weekend. Like and that's crazy to say considering where the Bucks were last year, and it's kind of the same position against a top tier team in the NFC from the East that didn't win a division. The Cowboys last year, the Bucks were one game worse last year. So kind of the same setup, except the Eagles, had a much worse setup at the end of the season. That slide for them. The Cowboys, despite as good as they were last year, they didn't win the division, but they never had a slide the way the Eagles did these last few games. You got Nick Sirianni possibly on the hot seat. Like there's a lot going on. The legitimate reason I'm picking is one, yes, I think they're the better team, like you said, but two, I don't want to fall into that trap of like, underestimating the Eagles and boom, they turn around and lose because I would be the one to pick the Bucks and then they turn around and lose to the Eagles here. But I think it's entirely possible. Like it's not even a question. Like this one might literally end up 1916. I mean 17-14. I might even be lower scoring than that. I mean this for the Eagles. I mean there just hasn't been too much really to smile about. I think if they win this one, it'd just be off of pure talent. Like that's really that simple. To be honest with you, like that's more of a college type analysis there. Like pure talent is going to get them this win because otherwise, pure talent and the fact that they don't want to be the laughing stock of the league after what they've been through the last month and a half, possibly playing for the coach's life, not literally, but his coaching life, I should say. But yeah, so I'll go with the Eagles, but like this is, as I say a lot of times, this is not a confident pick at all. Um, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Bucks send them home, and maybe they'll be looking for another coach next year.